Hey, welcome to the Animal Rights Show. And I've got to get rid of some sound first. There we go.
Evening all, morning.
Hello, everyone.
Afternoon, morning,
others.
evening.
Hi, everyone.
This is a global program. Evening, afternoon, wherever we're from.
It's tomorrow in Australia.
Tomorrow in Australia.
Yeah, it's tomorrow in Australia.
Oh, that's clever, isn't it?
Is it yesterday somewhere else? Yeah, is it?
Probably.
It actually is.
It probably is yesterday somewhere.
So we're embarking on a possibly going to end up being 2 or 3 weeks of looking at the issue of climate change, or we call it the climate catastrophe, on the grounds that it seems to be getting rather serious, although there is still quite a lot of denial going on in those terms. So as you can see, we have with us 2 guest panelists. So Pamela from Animal Justice Emergency, hello.
Hiya.
And some of the geezer, yeah, that way.
That should be that.
Yeah.
I've had that before.
We should have Joaquin Phoenix do that for you, Ronnie.
It's quite some years ago in Rome, someone done that to me.
But is that the good one? We can never work out if that's the good one or the bad one. The thumbs
It's
down.
probably bad, isn't it? Such doing.
Right.
I didn't realise you were that old, though, Ronnie.
I am nearly as old as you, Roger. Now.
Nearly. So what we're going to do, and obviously it's very related, is the last time, because we had a week off, and then thank you everyone who kind of tuned into my academic thing that I did last week. But we had a report from Nella to start the last Animal Rights Show about what was going on in Greece and elsewhere. And we're going to have a bit of an update, Nella. So if you'd like to start, I've got some photographs which I'll just show on the screen, and you can comment to that as you wish. Yeah, so.
We could not show any graphic pictures. As you can imagine, there are plenty of them, but we decided not to. So these are pictures of other animals trying to escape from the flames.
Yeah, so this is the first one, I believe. Yeah.
This area is already burned. I'm really sorry to report that 3 weeks after the fires are still raging. We have fires in different areas. Some days, sometimes the same fires are going on for days. They cannot be controlled. It's really a catastrophe. And what gets me is that everyone, as you can imagine, everyone here is talking about the fires like all the time, but very few people talk about the climate crisis, and even fewer people talk about the link, the relationship between the climate crisis and animal agriculture. And as you can imagine, these people are only animal rights activists. So today's topic is very interesting for me, because we will raise the question how we can talk about the climate catastrophe without being too anthropocentric.
Nella, did you get to the bottom of the thing about there was a bit of a question mark last time whether it was arson or not? Has that been resolved?
Not yet, because people have been arrested, but we have to wait for the procedure. And someone else was arrested yesterday. So the reasonable conclusion is that some of these fires started because of arson, but I would guess that they would not be that large or that catastrophic without the weather conditions. Because fires during the summer is not unusual. I will have them every year as long as I can remember, but they were never like this.
No. And did you take these photographs, Nella?
No. These are photographs that I found on social media by the volunteers that first and journalists that arrived at the burning areas, and all kinds of other animals paid the price. I mean, free living beings, of course, especially snakes, turtles, animals that are not fast. Animals we breed with women as humans, like the individuals on this picture, that usually are not able to escape if someone doesn't open the door to free them. And also many horses, especially in areas with horseback riding clubs, and even dogs, not only stray dogs, dogs that were chained in backyards, and stray dogs and cats. I mean, I don't think that any species were spared.
No, you also mentioned, because I noticed with apart from the deers, these other animals, they seem to be fenced in. Presumably that's why they were there, right?
Yes.
So they weren't. See, I don't understand that. I mean, even if you can't take them, at least you could free them to give them a chance, couldn't you? I mean, that just seems,
in many cases that didn't happen, and it was very disturbing because you would read that the fire approaches an area where 1,000 sheep live. So I mean, how we can free 1,000 sheep like in an hour or so? And the second question is for the owner of the sheep, were they willing to do that?
okay, yeah, because other animals are property, they're hoping
Yes.
that it's going to miss them and they can come back and reclaim. Yeah. So, yeah, speciesism strikes again.
But I think another point is that, these are larger animals that we're seeing, isn't it?
Yes.
What about all the sort of small birds and smaller, reptiles and insects and mammals and everyone, I mean, because there must be so many of them. It's just absolutely horrendous.
Yeah, these are the real.
Actually,
I was going to say, I mean, these are kind of the main victims of these things. We hear about how these fires affect humans, and that's horrific. But it's massively more horrific for other animals, because it's the same as the whole story, really, of the climate crisis. It massively affects other animals, particularly free-living animals, more than humans. I mean, it's something that the human species has done to other animals, and it's part of human imperialism, how we've dominated and oppressed other animals, that now this is, something else that the human species has imposed on them, the climate crisis, which is wiping them out already in billions. And we need to remember that it's the focus always seems to be on the human, as in everything, when in fact it's other animals who are by far the main victims of the climate crisis.
And actually, when you hear the reports, like even when you hear reports of like fires or flooding or any kind of environmental damage on the news, they always report like the death toll, but they only ever really report the human death toll. And I always wish that they would just, include everyone and I know they can't include every individual, but at least give an indication of what is happening to all the other non-human beings that are living and being affected. And it just really frustrates me, and I think that's maybe part of our role as advocates, is to make sure that these stories are brought into the light and to raise awareness and to put out the pictures and put out the stories and be on the ground as allies and bring their experiences into the light, because they're so invisibilized. It's just horrific, really.
And also to ask questions like why is there no sort of contingency plan? These fires have not come out of nowhere. People knew that they were happening. Why don't they have some sort of a plan? Like Roger was saying, to sort of like open the gates or fences, or, why aren't trenches built? I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever. It shows how unvalued, the lives of the other beings are. It's just speciesism rampant.
Yeah, definitely.
Indeed. Well, we've got 13 tuned in, so hello, folks. So we've got a few in the chat. So if you want to say hello, you can do it. You can do it there. Just think so. We've got Deb, Jennifer, Michael. Michael was well ahead of everybody else today. I noticed. So well done there.
He was here yesterday, Michael, waiting.
Race lever, Deb. So hi everyone. So yeah. So I don't know if anybody. I think Ronnie, you saw the George Monbiot thing that I posted today,
Yes.
and I also posted the Steve Best one. I mean, the one I always post from Luxembourg is his Total Liberation talk, but at the same time, he did one about the ecological crisis and veganism, which is well worth watching as well. And in a way, it's quite depressing, or at least challenging, because he's basically saying that things have got so bad now. It's a question of, are things going to get bad or are things going to get terrible? And so, this is the idea that, a lot of the tipping points have gone already. And so it's funny, though, isn't it? Like the way that human beings are, I sometimes wonder, we make so many claims about ourselves, about how rational and everything we are. But, I suppose as long as the electricity works, and as long as your toilet flushes, and as long as the Premiership's back on the TV or something, nobody's going to take any notice until those things have gone, it seems to me. Because I was going to say it's failure to see things at a distance. I mean, this is, in many ways where we've got the climate crisis, that people are aware of immediate threats and react to immediate threats. But something that's a bit further away, they don't take any notice of. And that applies in lots of ways, like people in other countries, what's happening to them. Oh, I'm not bothered about them. It's kind of my little life that matters and the things that surround me. And it's the same, and it's the same in time. If something's not going to happen for some years in the future, well, let's not worry about it. And this is a problem that seems to be kind of endemic to humans, that this failure to see things at any distance from what is immediately in front of us. Well, I mean, not us, because I think we do, but most humans seem to be like that.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's almost like a really short-term thinking, immediate gain, immediate kind of not just the problems, but also immediate pleasures as well. People are so set on what's immediately in front of them in terms of pleasure or pain. They don't really think much beyond that, I think. But it's surprising, because often it's the people who have got children who are then going to have children who are going to have children, perhaps, who don't seem to think about that, what they're kind of leaving for their descendants, whereas some of us might not have to worry about that so much, and yet we're the ones who do worry about it, which is quite
that's
ironic,
true,
really, isn't
it? But politicians play into this because they deal with very short timeframes, because they know that people don't think very far ahead, so they themselves only kind of propose things that are going to be sort of effective in the short term, and there's no long-term thinking. And this is why we've got the climate crisis in many ways, because of lack of long-term thinking from and action from politicians.
But it's more than that, isn't it? It's like it's convenient, isn't it? I mean, that's the end of the day. It suits the sort of like neoliberal system and all of us that benefit from that to not make changes. I mean, that's fundamentally, it works. It works for those of us, in the rich countries, it works for us in the rich countries to a greater or lesser extent. So,
hey Pamela, I was open a book to see how long it would take you to say neoliberal. I forgot
She's done quite well today. She hadn't said how long have we been going?
Well, I think it's like everything needs to be seen in the context of systems, really, rather than in terms of as well as individuals. But I think you need to look at systems type of thinking in order to understand what's actually going on, and that's where neoliberalism and catastrophic climate breakdown are all systems, into which the individuals also play a part. But if we don't look at it from a systemic point of view, we're just wasting our time, aren't we? And I think that's why it's really important to talk about, you know, catastrophic climate breakdown in the context of animal liberation, animal activism.
I think that's
Where do you think, that's a general question. I mean, a few years ago, I would say that when people see the consequences of the climate crisis near them, close to them, they will start thinking about that. But then at this moment, you have half the Europe burning and the other half drowning in floods. So this is like happening near us, and yet people don't realize what this is, what they're experiencing.
But it's nowhere on the media. I mean, it's not. I mean, I don't watch mainstream media, but I don't know how sort of accurately it's and how much it's being covered on mainstream media, you know, or whether it's the usual sort of rubbish of football and you know, reality TV and, you know, all that sort of stuff. I mean, it's also like what are the politicians saying? What the political leaders saying? Well, they're ignoring it as well. You know, Boris came back from wherever he was for crisis talks on Afghanistan, but what about crisis talks on catastrophic climate breakdown? No, because it suits the system.
There's more. I've noticed a lot more talk about the climate crisis in the media recently, because I always used to be very shocked at how little it was in the media, considering that many in the UK, many councils had announced climate emergency, and I'm not sure about other countries of what their position was, but for decades we've been talking about this climate crisis, and I always used to think, how come we're in such emergency and no one is talking about it in the media? And yet recently I feel it's been a lot more spoken about, a lot more reports, a lot more obviously with the different extreme weather that's going on across the world as well. There's been a lot more reporting on it, so it does seem to be going more that way, that people are talking more about it. But I think sometimes individuals feel helpless, or they don't know what to do. They just feel it's too big, and so in a way that overwhelms them, so they shut down. Sometimes I feel that goes on as well.
Are you talking about news bulletins, Wendy, or documentaries, or both, or
sort of Sky News reports, reports in the media online, reports on the radio, in the news items, and people coming on and talking and interviewing people who are involved in reports about climate change. So I've heard it a lot more just in the last 2 or 3 months.
But I think that's the XR effect, isn't it? The Extinction Rebellion effect. You know, that sort of what everyone thinks about XR, and I think they've actually got more radical, which is great. You know, that they kind of raised the issue. They basically spent 3 years sort of like doing different kinds of actions that have raised the profile of catastrophic climate breakdown. And finally, there is some sort of traction within other media, because it's like it's sort of, you know, it's kind of become a thing that people can actually have a conversation about. But even so, the way it's covered in the media is still very much a sort of things that, you know, terrible things are going to happen in 2100 or in 50 years' time, you know, something awful is going to happen, rather than sort of like in 5 years' time, we're going to have a blue ocean event in the Arctic, and that's going to totally destabilize the jet stream, which is going to be, you know, like massive problems, to put it mildly. You know, as I said, in estimated 3 to 5 years, you know. The sense of urgency is still not really there. I mean, the other thing is that people are obviously, this is a really horrendous subject to talk about, because you're facing not only your own sort of like, you know, fear and terror of death, of course, but, you know, the extinction of everything that you've worked for, your family and friends have worked for, your society, all the presumptions about how you thought your life was going to be, you know, the legacy that you were or were not going to leave to your sort of like, you know, grandchildren or whatever. And it is catastrophic for people to think about it. There is so much climate anxiety now. I was actually feeling quite badly over the last sort of week, just because of researching this stuff so much in depth, and it is really confronting. And I've been sort of aware of catastrophic climate breakdown for about 7 odd years. Before that, I was like, campaigning for about 20 odd years. And it comes in waves, and it's really difficult stuff to handle. There's such a thing as climate anxiety, and loads of people are experiencing this, because they just don't know where to put themselves. There was a speech. I watched the XR live stream yesterday, and one of the people that was giving a speech was a mum. And she was saying that her daughter has joined, who's about, I think she said 8, has joined some sort of thing that the youth actions or whatever it's called. And the daughter was sort of like saying to her mum, I'm just so tired of this. I'm so tired of this. I don't want to do it. And the mum was saying in her speech, well, what do I tell her? It was absolutely heartbreaking. You can totally get why people are in denial. And that's obviously why there's sort of like not a ton of people sort of like watching this. But at the end of the day, denial will get you so far. But do we want to be, well, clearly a lot of people don't want to be real, but do we want to try and make a bit of a difference and authentic?
And actually what interests me with this, and this might answer Paula's question, what is the point of this discussion? And I think what inspired this theme of the topic tonight was actually looking at how, as animal advocates, how do we convey and communicate in our advocacy the urgency of the climate crisis in relation to other animals. And this is what we wanted to talk about, really, is how do we put this across? Should we be talking about the climate crisis within our advocacy for animal liberation, animal rights? It's interconnected, of course. We can't separate the two out. And yet one thing that does worry me about this, and I'd love to hear your perspectives on this as well, is I'm concerned that if we talk about the violations of other animals which are entangled, but we kind of put it into a human-centric focus, like we say, we should be stopping these violations of other animals because it's polluting our rivers and oceans, we're still putting that focus away from the actual inherent rights themselves, and that the things that we're doing to other animals are atrocities in their own right, regardless of the consequence to the environment. So I think for me, it's how do we get that balance of not distracting our advocacy with environmental issues and still being able to talk about inherent and moral and basic rights and respect and justice in its own right for other animals, but not ignoring, of course, the connections. And this is what interests me.
I think a lot of animal activists will see that, have that reaction. That's the sort of go-to reaction for a lot of animal activists, and that's not the framing that I'm using at all. I've got a 4-point framing here, and it's nothing to do with that at all. It's about specifically looking at, the timescale, the short timescale that we have in order to do anything effective, whether it's animal advocacy or anything else, because of catastrophic climate breakdown. Number 2, the impacts on so-called farm animals, imprisoned beings, yeah? Number 3, the impacts on free living animals. This is not in any order of importance, yeah? The impacts of catastrophic climate breakdown. And then how the animal death industry, number 4, is actively working to put out piles of misinformation in the same way that, say, the tobacco industries or the oil industries are doing in order to stop effective advocacy on the animal death industry, what's the so-called meat industry. So, I mean, I don't know if that's sort of, we'll go into it in a bit more detail, but it's specifically not looking at, the impacts of, slurry in rivers, although that's obviously important.
Yeah, we've got a presentation coming. Just before we get to that, I just want to bring this up, which is really interesting, especially, Pamela, you talked about, the time scale and kind of we don't have much time and everything. And I remember, and I always was a bit worried about this, but I remember when I was lecturing at UCD in Dublin, there was one lecture where I kind of suggested, isn't it interesting in the time of climate crisis that people are still having children, and because if the climate crisis thesis was true, their children wouldn't make it to being adults, But I kind of realized really that people are not kind of thinking in those terms, in terms of, having kids and their future. And one of the things is I wonder whether what might feed into skepticism about it is one of the films that I recommend a lot is called Home, the Home Project on YouTube. So it's Home, in capitals. And it's 90 minutes long. It's absolutely beautiful to look at, but it's got a very kind of devastating environmental message. And yet at the end of that film, it says, well, we've only got eight years left. And I think the film was about 11 years ago, you know. And so I think that a lot of people, you know, like if you get a kind of, well, we've only got this amount of time and then that goes. It's a little bit like the end of the world thesis and all that kind of stuff. You end up not believing it, don't you?
Well, you only don't believe it if you don't read the science, and the science is not difficult to understand. I mean, the science, you know, you can sort of, there are tons of sort of like, there's a good channel on YouTube by a Canadian climate systems scientist called Paul Beckwith. Very, very digestible stuff, 15-minute segments, you know, goes through it in very, very easy to understand terms, very sort of like non-dramatic, you know, talking about all this stuff. There's tons of other, you know, just Google climate change or catastrophic climate breakdown on YouTube and you'll find some good sources. But it's like everything else, you need to keep your finger on the pulse. You need to sort of like get your basic understanding, which is pretty simple and straightforward, and then just keep yourself up to date, you know. And most people don't want to do that. They'd like to keep up to date on the sort of like the sports activities or their sort of like celebrity heroes or heroines, and whatever their sort of like enjoyable little side projects are. And I completely understand why that is. And that's why they don't believe that it's real, but also because there's no traction, again, apart from, as Wendy was saying recently, with the media, with politicians taking a significant and you know, strong and proactive lead. Of course, people are going to feel sort of caught between two places. I'm not saying it, you know, people think of themselves as individual thinkers, but they're not. They just aren't.
I think more and more people are accepting that it's real. And one way we increase that is by putting out information about it being real. But going back to what Wendy said about you know, animal liberation advocates being concerned about campaigning for the environment and campaigning to do something about the climate crisis being human-centric. I think all we have to do is emphasize the harm that the climate emergency, climate catastrophe is causing to other animals. And as I said earlier, it's causing far more slaughter and suffering to other animals, and will continue to do so, than it is to humans. So combating the climate crisis is very much an animal liberation issue. There's probably, I mean, there are probably, you know, we probably all consider that the greatest area of animal slaughter is the food industry. You know, we have 50,000 animals every second slaughtered throughout the world to feed humans. But I think animals that suffer and die because of adverse human impact on the environment probably comes fairly close to that. It certainly would be the second largest area of the oppression of other animals by humans. And for a long time, I think that was ignored, you know, largely ignored by the animal liberation movement. But I think that's changing. And I think people are becoming more aware of that. And so we can campaign we can campaign to heal the climate. Really, we can campaign against, you know, to stop the climate crisis from the point of view.
I know, Ronnie, you're on your phone, so you can't see the full screen, but there is a comment here by Peter Davis. I'll read it out for you. Depressing how many animal rights activists are boycotting XR because it's not seen as a vegan organization. So I think that kind of speaks to what you've just said. And again, I think that's part and parcel, actually, of the fact that we've now got a fairly reduced version of vegan flying around the you know, we've got the animals only kind of version of veganism. And I think that is feeding into this entire problem, which we're bound to get onto in terms of this conversation in a way, because there's no reason why vegans can't be interested in the environment. I mean, that is the habitat of the other animals, you know, and unless they're only concerned about domesticated other animals, and they wouldn't say that they were, I'm sure. So,
well, there are 2 points that I'd like to sort of put in there. Sorry. is number one, I was listening to the sort of speeches from XR's opening event yesterday, and they've come up with this concept of co-liberation, where they're sort of like uniting, catastrophic climate breakdown, ecological breakdown with various sort of like freedom struggles, both human, and they actually mentioned animals for a few times, and I think they're probably generally talking about free living animals, but at least animals were mentioned a couple of times, which I thought was a massive thing, really important. They actually had speakers from Animal Rebellion. They had Dora and some bloke who's an ecologist, and the woman that I mentioned with the kid, I can't remember if she was AR or AXR or not. So I was very heartened by that, and I totally understand. You don't have to join XR. You could all, if you wanted to, if you're minded to, join AXR, Animal Rebellion. Wendy, maybe you could say something about that.
You're muted, Wendy.
That's handy. Animal Rebellion are starting a rebellion this week. Actually, they started today. They run alongside Extinction Rebellion. That's going to be running for 2 weeks. So there will be a lot of actions going on. The strategy of Animal Rebellion is very much plant-based food system, justice for the food system. It is another animal focus, but they don't sort of advocate for rights as such. It's not a rights organization, and they don't really advocate for veganism as such, although most people in that organization are vegan and are animal rights people. The strategy is very different to run alongside the strategies of Extinction Rebellion. So there's a lot of pushback on the ethos sometimes from different activists, but who knows if this strategy might be the one. They get a lot of attention. They're doing some great actions against McDonald's. I think sometimes things can run alongside each other and have some great results and get attention and draw a lot of activists in. So we'll see how that plays out as well.
Yeah, right now, Ronnie joked just before we came on air that this might be a 7-part series, and we've just about done the intro, so I think he might be right. So let's let's put onto the screen what we're supposed to be doing. So this is a document, Pamela, that you've put together. So you want to take us through this document, and also it kind of goes to that 4-part thing that you just mentioned. So that's Timescale, other animals, so-called farmed, other animals, free living, and climate washing, I think, was what we put as a kind of thing for that. So yeah. So do you want to make an opening statement or anything like that, or?
I just think this is really important. And that it's important to look at climate change, catastrophic climate change, as a framing. And let's just crack on. So we've talked about the time scale being very short. You've got your feedback loops. All the science is saying, scientists are saying it's faster than we originally thought. Once we've got the wobbly jet stream from the Blue Ocean event, some September in the next 2 or 3 years, everything's up for grabs climate-wise. Now, what that means is it's going to impact the environment, the habitat. So the first thing I'm going to be looking at is free living beings, because I think people will be more familiar with the sort of like so-called farmed animals. And I'm going to be using some words, like farmed animals, which I'm not necessarily comfortable with, but sometimes it's just easier because of the complexity of the subject to talk about that rather than things like the animal death industry. So in terms of free living beings, we've got 2 elements that they'll be affected by with catastrophic climate breakdown, is the habitat loss and the fact that they can't adapt and therefore they die. And I'm going to be quoting here from a Guardian article called Baked Barnacles, Scorched Cherries, The Disastrous Impact of Heat Waves on Plants and Animals by Gabrielle Cannon. So she says, more than 1 billion sea creatures across the Pacific Northwest perished in this year's heat wave. More than 1 billion sea creatures, more than 1 billion. And it's just a taste of what's to come. When forecast foreshadowed the Pacific Northwest devastating heat wave at the end of June, marine biologist Christopher Harley was alarmed and intrigued. Then came the smell, and his feelings somberly shifted. Quote, "It was this putrid smell of decay," Harley said, "across hundreds of miles of coastline. The extreme heat baked the barnacles, seaweed, and small sea creatures exposed to the elements along the shore. Starfish that failed to crawl to shadier spots were cooked alive. Mussels lay agape along the rocks, the tissue crisped between their shells. Nowhere is safe." So Harley went to the beaches to measure the body temperatures of the mussels, but it was too late. By the third day, only the third day of this record-breaking heat wave, they had all died. Quote, "We were just walking across carpets of dead mussels on the shore in awe," he says. And then it says, initial estimates show that over 1 billion creatures that live in the shallow waters across the Pacific Northwest perished in the heat that week. Over 1 billion creatures in 1 week. That's something to think about, I think. And that's just an estimate. It could be tons more. Scientists expect the impact will have a trickle-down effect on the ecosystem and the other animals that rely on those that died for food and habitat. So that is the whole kind of thing about these sort of like ecosystems. It's a system. So, you know, the barnacles and the mussels would obviously have been food animals for fishes and heaven knows what else. I'm not a biologist. And so once those populations collapse, you're going to get this sort of like knock-on effect of other animals over a period of time, both marine and non-marine, starting to collapse. So, yeah, that's kind of quite important, I think. So the second part of this one is another scientist that was quoted. As the environment continues to warm due to human-caused global heating, spiking temperatures will become more frequent, more intense, and last longer. So these kind of disruptions are going to be worse and more frequent. Because heat and drought are inextricably linked, the compounding catastrophes that have plagued the West this summer will persist into the future, continuing to wreak havoc on ecosystems, infrastructure, and agriculture. So basically everything that Nella's been talking about, we've been seeing also in Germany with the floods, etc., etc. This is all going to be compounded and happening more. These are all ecosystems. Apart from everything else, they are ecosystems. We're free living animals, you know, from tiny sort of like insects and marine species and whatever, up to birds and others, all sorts of mammals and everyone else live. And when these systems are frequently disrupted, what on earth is going to happen to the free living animals? So this professor says, Jonathan Stillman, a professor of biology at San Francisco University, says, animals are also struggling to adapt, and for some, the prognosis is grim. His research shows that for animals that have already adjusted to higher heat, it will be even harder to adapt when the temperatures spike further. They don't have the ability to cope when the temperature goes just a little bit above the maximum they've adapted to, he said. They can't tolerate just a little bit more. This includes small birds living on the edge of their water needs, desert dwellers who have nowhere else to go when the nights fail to cool down, and fish that aren't able to reach the areas they spawn. And then this is a great example on the fish front. Spring-run Chinook salmon in California's Central Valley were decimated by the heat. After making a significant recovery following the 2018 campfire that critically diminished the already threatened fish, more than 83% of the roughly 15,000 adults in Butte Creek, the largest population of the federally protected fish in California, died, according to a senior policy advisor for the fisheries West Coast region. So those figures again, more than 83% of 15,000 adults of these Chinook salmon. And this bloke says, it is devastating, he said, calling this an indicator of the severity of the drought and heat wave. It is the largest loss of adult salmon we have ever seen in the Central Valley. Salmon in the Columbia River farther north were also documented swimming slowly and lethargically through the overheated waters with large red abrasions and burn marks. Let's just think about that. The fish had large red abrasions and burn marks. Now, we know about these salmon because they're quite big and, you know, they're well researched. But what about all the smaller beings? We know nothing. But what we can probably sort of assume is that huge numbers, colossal numbers of, you know, creatures like tiny fishes, tiny crabs, all sorts of beings. And, you know, maybe sort of little marine mammals as well. I don't know. But loads of them will be going to the wall. They have already gone to the wall.
Pamela, when you were reading, just want to ask you something. You were reading this. I was trying to imagine what some non-vegan person thinks about it. And the first thing that came in mind is that they would say, okay, we lost salmon, so what? Because we don't, I mean, as a majority, we don't feel interconnected with other species, and we're not aware that we are part of the ecosystem. So I guess that for most people, reading about small fish or small marine mammals, it would not scare them.
Well, I mean, you may well be right. And that is, I mean, the thing is, you may well be right, but a lot of people like to bang on about how much they love nature, don't they?
Yeah.
And there's people are always banging on about, oh, I love nature. And there's all this sort of like rhetoric now, you know, with COVID about how we all need to go into nature to regenerate ourselves. It's been seen like it's almost like this virtue signaling thing. Oh, yes, I love nature. This sort of like foggy notion of what nature is and how nature operates. And this really drives me mental because, you know, they may not actually be bothered about salmon, but they are kind of bothered about having somewhere probably nice to walk and, you know, nice trees with nice birds and, oh, that's a butterfly there. Oh, there's a bee, you know, so but they don't join it up. It's this, again, it's this whole lack of sort of like systems thinking, you know, they don't connect the whole sort of like the crash of one species in one area, one population with lack of food for other species. The whole, you know, the whole ecosystems, it's called a system because, you know, it's a system, it's a network.
I think you've kind of both touched on something there as well, which I think part of the problem is this false divide of human, animal, nature. Like we're all separate, but we're so interconnected, and yet we don't see. We separate out. So humans, there's humans, and then there's everything else, and it's just so it's just creating so much havoc, isn't it? On the earth, because we are separating ourselves out, but we're not separate. We're not separate from every other animal on this planet. We're not separate from nature. We're all part of it and we're interconnected. And it's like the fundamental underlying issue is this human supremacy and human exceptionalism that we have. And until we deal with that, and I think that's what we as animal advocates need to really challenge, is human supremacy more than anything else, because until we kind of dismantle this hierarchy that we've created, this is just going to keep going. Because it's like Nella said, people will look at the barnacles and the fishes and be like, okay, so what? Because there's that sense that there's something less than, there's someone less than humans are. And until we kind of change that mindset, it seems that, and especially when people are in some kind of crisis, the other animals who find themselves very, very low down on the hierarchy are going to be the last thing that people care about in terms of helping and saving. It's going to be, oh, how can we save ourselves? We've seen that with the COVID pandemic. How do we save ourselves? Let's test and research this vaccine on other animals. Let's farm, horseshoe crabs to take their blood. Let's kill all these sharks to take whatever we need from them in order to save the humans. This is the attitude that we have to dismantle, as far as I can see.
It is. Sorry, Pamela, I was going to ironically, of course, the in the same way as the climate crisis, the root cause of the COVID crisis is human supremacism. It's because of the way humans have treated other animals in terms of farming and in terms of the exploitation of free living animals. That's what has caused COVID. That's what caused 3 out of 4 pandemics that affect humans. And so it's actually human supremacism is the root cause of the climate crisis as well. It's our lack of consideration, doing whatever we want without considering what the impact that is going to have on other animals. And that is the root cause of the climate crisis. And what's happened is both those things have come back to bite humans on the arse, haven't they? Like our oppression of other animals has come back to bite us. And it's only when that happens that people start running around with their hands up in the air, doesn't it? I mean, for instance, you know, this thing about our house is on fire, you know, with the climate crisis. Oh, the human house is on fire and we've got to do something about it urgently because our species threatens extinction. Is you know, we're in danger of becoming extinct. Well, how many other animal species have been made extinct because of human activity? Hundreds, thousands. And where were all the protesters on the streets then? Where was the blocking of London then? When those species were going extinct, when those animals were suffering and dying, you know, because of human tyranny. It's only when the human is affected that we get all the fuss, and that's completely wrong. You know, this is our, you know, the human species is paying the price now for what we've done to other animals, and it would be okay if the ones that were responsible for it paid the price. I mean, they can burn, you know, they can die. You know, I don't care about them, the ones that are responsible. But I think it's, you know, the shame is that so many innocent humans will suffer and die because of it, and that's why obviously we have to struggle to do something about it, and of course for the other animals as well we have to do that.
Do you know, even the word, Ronnie, even the word environment, I don't know if you've looked into the kind of origins of that, but even the word environment comes from the French environ, which is environ, a little accent, which means around. So
I was just pissing.
But it basically, when even the word environment places us as the subject surrounded by the environment, so we're still become the center of the environment because it talks about what we're surrounded by and what we exist within. So we're even at the center. And the same with world. It's an old English word from a Germanic compound, which basically means the age of man or human existence, human race, humanity, mankind, that kind of thing. So even the word world, I've started to kind of stop using the word world so much and use the word the earth rather than world, because I find it, again, it's placing humanity at the center of the universe as always. So just
a question that arises from all this is if, which I believe the root of the problem is human supremacy, and as we know, as Pamela is explaining, we're out of time. I guess we don't have the time to dismantle human supremacy. So what do? I mean, we try to raise awareness and mobilize people, even if they do it for their own motives, even if their motives are to rescue the human race. How do we use this in our advocacy? Do we have the luxury to try not to be anthropocentric since we are out of time?
I think we have. I think we're able. It's very important to act together with other organisations that are aiming for the same thing, even if it might not be the same reasons. Like, for instance, becoming involved in Extinction Rebellion, becoming involved in groups that want to protect the natural world. And I think there's kind of two ways of doing it, and I think those two things have to happen together. I mean, first of all, putting pressure on existing governments and existing authorities to change things, to do something about the climate crisis. That's the first thing. But secondly, educating ordinary people, making people aware of what's happening, educate people to go vegan, because animal agriculture is a huge part. It plays a huge part in causing the climate crisis. It may even be the major cause. And so it's really important.
Unfortunately, Ronnie, most environmental groups don't even talk about that, do they?
They don't.
Even XR. They don't talk about. It's not up there in anyone's list.
No,
but that's part of our job, isn't it? I mean, that's part of our jobs as advocating vegans. Which I know you sort of like talked about a bit, haven't you, Ronnie? It's like to get into these other groups and actually start talking about it. I mean, I did it in XR and with no great results. When they started in sort of like 3 years ago. But that doesn't mean to say we stop having those conversations with other non-vegan environmentalists. I think it's really important that we do. And to Nella's point about that we don't have time. Well, we can't possibly. It's really difficult to advocate on human supremacy. Well, we're in a time, I think, of great societal change. And I think XR and Animal Rebellion and all sorts of other sort of like activist groups have now got together in this sort of like coalition. And there will be more of a coalition for the COP26 in Glasgow in November. So I think it's a great time actually to advocate to these other groups, and sort of start talking about human supremacism. You say that they, and I feel that, the leverage of the catastrophic climate breakdown crisis that we're facing might make people a bit more open to having their ideas sort of reworked a little bit. I mean, I don't know, and I'm not saying it would be easy, but I'm saying it could be seen as an opportunity because people will be sort of really hoping or people will be questioning. Some people, not everybody, some people will be really questioning they are questioning the status quo.
If we want people to see the world as it is, we've got to describe it as it is. We've got to say what it is. It's like the emperor's got no clothes, isn't it? We've got to say, all these problems are caused by human supremacism. We have a situation where where the human oppression of other animals makes the Nazis look like Mary Poppins, in relation. Not that they were, but in terms of comparison and in the amount of slaughter and suffering that's caused. We have a human Reich in the world that dominates and oppresses all the other animals, and that is the biggest social justice problem that exists, and the biggest social justice problem that's ever existed in the history of the world. It should be number one on the agenda. Number one on the agenda of everything is to end human supremacism, to end the oppression of other animals. When you look at the number of victims, 50,000 a second animals killed to feed humans when we could all be vegan, and then the billions and billions that suffered because of adverse human impact on the environment, and then we have at least 50 million suffer and die because of experimentation, and so the list goes on. And that's got to be the number one priority of the human species, is putting an end to that. Stop being oppressors. Our species has to stop being oppressors. And that means radical changes to the way that humans behave as individuals and, as a society and politically and everything. And we have to say it as it is. We have to say that the emperor's got no clothes. There's no other way of doing it. You have to use the right language.
But Ronnie, we come a little bit round to neoliberalism again and the culture of society. I mean, before we started this, the Vegan Songstress did a TikTok live stream, which engaged 74,000 people in the end, but most of those people were completely selfish. You know, all they wanted to say is how much they love to eat meat and bacon and all the rest of it. And I know we can't use TikTok as a barometer of things, but you know, there is a major kind of problem with the fact that even though you've got, you know, vegan versions of just about everything, it's almost like they don't care. So, you know, it's all based on what they want as an individual. It's kind of like me. I mean, that's the overwhelming thing that you get when you get out of the vegan bubble. It's kind of, well, I like it, you know, and I love that, and I love bacon, and you know, this is what makes me happy. It's all about them. It's almost like they don't care about anything else.
But I think this is exactly the reason why the concepts that, as I said, that I saw in the XR speeches yesterday of co-liberation is absolutely fascinating, because it seems to me what they're kind of talking about is total liberation, what we as vegans would understand as total liberation, but they're framing it in a somewhat different way. They're calling it co-liberation. So therefore they had like speakers from the global south, people talking about the sort of like a Haitian revolution, as I said, speakers from sort of like Animal Rebellion, who are not, you know, like the most sort of like, well, actually making some really good points, I have to say. So I think this notion of co-rebellion, now you're not going to get everybody. Most people, as you guys have already said, you know, are not really that interested in anything. But you don't need every single person to be interested in perhaps going vegan. You just need a sort of a significant chunk of society to say, hey guys, wake up, smell the burning bodies, you know, this is the reason, and you know, we're doing it, and you know, basically have a tranche of measures, both individual and societal and systemic, that will push those agendas forward. And societies are always in a state of flux, aren't they? Now, maybe they haven't always been in a state of, I don't know if there were ever societies that were not human supremacist, but there may have been. You know, change is happening, and change is always possible. I mean, you have to believe that, don't you?
I think the other thing is that, you know, how many people do you need to create change? We have to remember that we've got an appalling government at the moment. I don't know how to say too much about that. Elected by less than 30% of people eligible to vote, and that happens, and they're able to kind of, you know, to rule and dominate and impose everything. But that's all we need. That's all we need to get a government in power in this country that can take really radical measures to combat the climate crisis, take radical measures, you know, to towards animal liberation, to get the population consuming a vegan diet, all these things. We don't need to change everyone, because most people just go along with it. As long as they can watch Love Island, they just go along with everything, don't they? That's sadly what, you know, a very large number of people are like. So it don't really matter about them, because they're just going to go along anyway. They ain't going to protest. Oh, well, I'll just, as long as I can do my little thing, you know. So we don't have to change as many people as it might at first appear. But we have to work hard, you know, even so, you know, you're talking about, and all those people that voted a decent government and like that, they wouldn't necessarily all have to be vegan, but just maybe sympathisers and agreeing with like most of what was put forward. But that, I mean, it makes it more possible, but it's still a lot. And it means that, you know, that we as vegans have to work hard. And what we really need, more than anything, is far more vegans becoming involved in outreach, becoming involved in education, so that we can do that, so that we can, you know, get enough people educated that not only will that change things through how those people change their lifestyles and the effect of that, but also it will create enough people to change things politically as well.
This is the trouble, Ronnie. I was thinking about you yesterday, because I was having a conversation about this with someone who had come to an event, an activism event, fresh from Vegan Camp Out, and they were inspired by someone who gave a talk at Vegan Camp Out to come to do some activism, and they were saying I think it was one of the first things they'd done for other animals, and and I was saying, oh, how many people at Vegan Camp Out? He's like, oh, I think there are about 10,000 or something like that. And I was thinking, I wonder why all those people are not active. What is it? And I actually asked him the question.
They probably all got COVID from each other, Wendy.
Yeah.
It's super spreader event, isn't it? That's
super spreaders.
Yeah.
So and he was just basically saying, I think he got the feeling that a lot of people just feel like being vegan is enough, and that it's already a radical step. It's already, and we've talked about this before on the show as well, is being vegan enough, because it is radical, because you're always swimming against the tide. You've made a big change. But I think that a lot of vegans do feel that it's like their living vegan is activism in its own right, and so that they kind of stop there. Because if all those 10,000 people were to come from Vegan Camp Out and then go to, come down to whatever Camp Beagle, go to Animal Rebellion, go to do some outreach, whatever it is that they're drawn to and they feel they can do, leafleting. I know you talk about leafleting a lot, just door dropping, leafleting, whatever it is, then we'd have a lot more, feet on the ground in the grassroots. But it doesn't seem to work that way. Because we were talking yesterday, so everyone there was saying, I really feel like I need to be here, but I wish I could be free to go and do this as well. And we would just feel like we're spread so thin as activists that we have to try and do everything, and we can't. And if we could just get more people active.
I think a small number
Bob.
of people,
is that Bob, Pamela?
Yeah, that's Bob.
A small number of people, though, that are dedicated and perseverant and keep going can achieve a lot. I don't think. I think the majority of people who consider themselves vegan will always, remain non-active. I think that's that's very sad. But if we can get more, if we can get maybe 10-20% more of vegans to become active, that would make a huge difference, and that would probably sway it. We're not going to get all of them. We just need to get as many as we possibly can.
Well, maybe that's a reason to go to somewhere like Vegan Camp Out, and as a sort of like a little contingent, and sort of give some talks about, what you can do to get active, and, how to start your active. I mean, I don't know if they do that already, and how to start your activism journey. And can you call yourself vegan if you're not an activist? Something like that. I don't know. I mean, why not?
Yeah, I know Animal Rebellion put on coaches. They had Animal Rebellion actually had coaches there to take people from Camp Out down to start the rebellion if they were inspired to do it. So I thought that was quite a good recruiting method. Get on the coach.
Good idea.
Come on,
good idea.
We'll take you.
I gave a talk there in 2018 about the importance of vegans getting active, and then the following year there was a workshop that I was involved in organising along the same lines. So, it is a place where that kind of thing can be done. But how many I feel often, I'll give a talk, say, at a vegan festival, and there's people at the vegan festival, they're going around looking at the stalls and all that. It's a consumer event, a spectator event. And I often feel that people come and listen to me talk, and maybe there might be a room of 50 people, perhaps more. I often wonder whether they're kind of using me as just another form of entertainment instead of kind of taking anything away from it. I do often get that kind of feeling from it. You always hope that some people will take something away and become active. But it is very difficult. And I think we just have to keep trying. We just have to keep trying all the time to get more people active and to get more people spreading the message.
I mean, there's no real choice, is there? We have to just experiment with different ways, and, I mean, Animal Rebellion, the great thing about them is like their organizational sort of nous, they're very, very organized, they're sort of like, once you're on the email list, you're being constantly sort of like on a weekly basis asked to sort of like volunteer or donate or whatever. And they sort of like they've taken that template from XR. Now, it might not be everybody's sort of like cup of tea. I don't think it's probably mine, but it's certainly one way of capturing sort of new people. And I think the other thing is just, I mean, it must be, I can't imagine what it must be like for somebody like, Ronnie or Roger, who's been sort of like active for sort of like decades, you know, and sort of like going through these sort of like these same sort of conversations and trying to be advocates and, you know, giving talks and whatever since the year dot. But, you know, I mean, we all have to be like that. We all have to have that sort of perseverance to just sort of, what is the alternative? There's not one really, is there? And I do think that now is a moment societally where we might get more of a hearing. I really do. This concept of co-liberation, I found, as I said, really fascinating.
Do we have time to go into Pamela's third section, captive beings, or do you think
this one's quite short? It's very short.
Yeah.
Right, so I'll just go into it. So basically, I thought I'll keep this one sort of like short because, I mean, I think most people sort of like really get the sort of like the so-called farmed animals situation. Most vegans sort of like activists. So I'm just quoting here from, this is quite a useful resource. It's something called Animals Farmed, and it's a roundup of sort of, I think monthly animal farming and animal related sort of like content in The Guardian. You can sign up for that. Anyway, so this one was called China's Pig Critic Jailed, Rescue Sanctuaries and Factory Farming Ban. Right, but this one is about floods. So more than 1 million animals died in flash floods in the Henan province of China. A Reuters report from the village of Wangfan, where most of the 3,000 residents raise pigs or chickens or grow grain, found that at least 200,000 chickens and up to 6,000 pigs, half the villagers' herd, had been lost in the floods, the worst in centuries. So more than 1 million animals died, 3,000 residents, 200,000 chickens, up to 6,000 pigs, half the villagers' herd. Those were the captive animals. Presumably the other 500,000, I think it is, it's more than that, isn't it? 300,000. No, it's about 800,000. Well, I don't know whether those were so-called farmed animals or free living animals. It doesn't say here. But again, you know, in terms of, you know, we've all seen the reports in places like, I think it was America, wasn't it? Where sort of loads of sheep and cattle were drowning in some kind of floods. I mean, I kind of try not to watch these things, but the impact of catastrophic climate breakdown, whether it's the heat or whether it's the floods or whatever, and also when it comes to the lack of food, you know, they're going to stop producing food for the so-called farmed animals. And if you imagine what happens when the temperature starts to go up as it has done, and you've got animals inside these gigantic sort of, you know, huge sheds, as we all know, are they going to be suddenly sort of like putting on air conditioning? I don't think so. They'll just be keeling over. They'll just be keeling over in their God knows how many numbers. So I think, again, you know, the people as vegans who are sort of concerned, you know, about all kinds of living beings, this is something to factor in. This is something that's going to be happening more and more and more and more and more. It's already happening. We just don't see it in the news. I mean, you don't see it in the news, do you? Like 200,000 chickens in one village were drowned. You just in China. I mean, it's not going to happen. But we need to be putting this sort of stuff out. We need to be factoring this in to our own sort of advocacy. So, you know, all the statistics we know about so-called farmed animals, we can just take a guess and know that huge numbers of them will be affected by whether it's farms, or whether it's, say, if there's a shortage of feedstuffs, or by heat waves. And this is just the beginning.
And I suppose the ironic thing there, in a way, is that in a vegan world, none of those other animals would actually be there in the first place. So that's the thing. They're actually being raised, I imagine, in this situation to actually be used for consumption. So in a way that story, I imagine, would be reported in terms of the humans have lost their property, have lost their livelihood, rather than poor animals have lost their lives. And I suppose that's a difficult one to get your head around, isn't it, in a way? Because obviously we really, as vegans and animal rights advocates, we really feel for those individuals and what they're enduring, but in a way they ought not to be here in the first place. It's kind of a difficult one, isn't it?
But I mean, it's still a legitimate point to make, isn't it? You know exactly what you're saying. It's very legitimate to say, you know, well, they all had a right to live, and they were just horribly killed or died. You know, it's. I think these are just opportunities to raise the vegan flag, as it were, again. And it kind of might get a bit boring and a bit sort of like, oh God, you know, is anybody listening? But I think you always get that when you're doing advocacy, don't you? I mean, you never really know the impacts that you have. I mean, I was at this group where I've sort of embedded myself, which is a local sort of, like, they call it a climate cafe, and you know, we've met about 3 or 4 times, and then the last time weekly, and I've been sort of like talking when it's appropriate about sort of like other animals, and you know, if people are concerned about nature or climate breakdown, maybe they should consider, you know, like not using other animals. And, you know, to somewhat mixed responses, people basically say, well, yeah, one guy was saying very strongly, well, I used to be vegan. I understand that. I understand all that about the baby chickens being ground up. I said, well, fair enough, you know, but I mean, it's still a point. Anyway, the following week, he sort of like happily announced that he'd sort of bought some Lidl vegan, some sort of meals. And I was like, oh my God. You know, somebody else was sort of like saying, oh, well, I'm thinking about it, and took a leaflet that I gave her. And somebody else was sort of like saying, well, you've made me think a lot. So, I mean, you know, and who knows what's going to happen next week. And even if they, you know, you don't get sort of like an automatic, well, I'm a vegan, you don't know what happens when they go home or who they talk to. That sort of effect that we've all sort of like talked about. We don't know. And it's kind of killing, well, not, I don't want to say killing 2 birds with 1 stone, but whatever that, and what the vegan version of that analogy is, you're doing 2 things. You're sort of like being in a community, and you're also sort of like veganizing. So I think there are many different ways of approaching this, and they seem to be quite open to the conversations as well. And the thing is, once you're in a little group, you come back time and time again, so they can ask you questions, and you can sort of, you know, give them another thought about being vegan.
So it's probably important for us, like, and I know you're doing a lot of this now, Pamela, being in groups and communities where there are a lot of non-vegans, because you can come out of the bubble. We talk a lot about that. Is everyone hearing that noise?
Yeah, I don't know where it's coming from though. We could try muting just to see if we can figure out where it's coming from.
I think it might have been Pamela, actually.
Yeah, I think it was Pamela's mic. Yeah, so.
It's your mic, Pamela. Yeah, it's your mic.
Okay, that's a problem.
It might be better for Pamela not to go back to just using the computer without the headset, if her mic's causing problems.
Yeah, if that's plugged in, you could maybe unplug it now. So,
but it's interesting what she's talking about, because that's a kind of community outreach type thing, and I think this is something that the vegan movement's got to get more into. You see, at the moment, what tends to happen is with outreach events, is normally people go in the centre of a big city and they do some sort of outreach events. It might be an AV or Earthlings or some other event in the centre of a big city, and they've come from probably, you know, all around. That a lot of them may not even live in that city, certainly not in the centre, which is probably just a shopping area. And then they all go away again. And I think that's fair enough. I'm sure that you know that does a lot of good. But I think what we've got to start thinking about more is doing our outreach in more local areas and getting more involved in the communities in those areas. In other words, instead of just kind of doing this kind of hit and run street outreach, like kind of doing vegan information stalls and kind of food sample giveaways at local community events, at local carnivals, at local, local fairs, at all those things in the local area. And that's what we need to do. in order to reach the maximum of people, we've got to kind of get even more into the grassroots. We've got to become more localized. And in order to do that, one really important thing is that more vegan activists need to become organizers of events in their local areas, instead of just all going into a big city and standing there, like as a, just as a participant in those events. To actually start thinking, well, how can I organize stuff actually where I live? And if people do that, they'll find other vegans that will help them, because not all vegans are kind of going into the middle of big cities. There are vegans in local areas that are potential activists and that would become active if there's someone in that local area prepared to organise stuff. And I think if we're really going to spread the message everywhere, we've got to become more community-based with our outreach. And that also includes getting involved in groups that we've got affinity with, environmental protection groups, for instance, groups that are concerned maybe with animal rescue and stuff like that as well. So get involved in all these groups where there's some affinity with what we believe in, so that we can get truly embedded in local communities. And I think that that we really need to do that if we're going to spread the message as much as possible.
And that speaks to something actually I was having a conversation about yesterday, and that sometimes when people are in communities and you have kind of groups that are set up, say cubes or whatever it might be, that come from outside into the community, some of those people feel like they're being spoken to by outsiders. I had a conversation about this, and there was someone in a local area to me who had that exact experience, that they felt the member of the public said, oh, you're coming here into my community and you're telling me I should be doing this, I should be doing that, because it felt like that whole kind of attitude, we'll come and we'll give you the rules and how we think you should be living. Whereas if you're in your community and you're working from the inside, then of course you've got more opportunity to actually speak to people who are around you, who are community members like you are, and you have got more of an idea of what's going on in that community, rather than just someone from a completely different area who maybe hasn't got a feel, doesn't know what's going on, maybe speaks a different lingo, and comes with these hard rules that you must follow. I think it does speak to that kind of element of activism as well, doesn't it?
And also, if you operate locally, you get to know other vegans, which is on a psychological level is important, especially for new vegans. And plus, people can find you. I mean, they see you again and again, and they come to you with questions because they have time to think about it, and they may have genuine questions about it. It's much harder to say I'm going to the center of the city to find them, like, I don't know, on Sunday when they do the event. And there are multiple advantages when you operate locally.
So it's coming up to 20 past, folks. I said I'll give you a warning. Now, Ronnie, do you want to leave this thing about food is climate to later, or do you want to have a quick word about this now to finish, or what? And then we'll come back next week and finish off, I think.
I think there's one very important thing that kind of needs to be said, that kind of the climate crisis itself is something that vegans and animal liberationists, they should be the same people, really. It's really important that we do our utmost to combat the climate crisis because of the horrific effect that is having on other animals. I mean, and human animals as well, but for other animals, it's massively worse. It's important that we do that. But I think it's also important that we kind of we sort of understand that animal agriculture could be having a far greater impact on the climate than it is officially recognised. I think the IPCC, I think according to them, animal agriculture is probably probably, it's varied, but it's probably somewhere around about 15%. Perhaps a little bit less than that now. Was it 14%? There were different figures, but it's around about that. And that itself is kind of huge. And so someone becoming vegan, even if it was that, would make a big difference. But there was a paper published by a group called Climate Healers in I think that was in 2019. That came to the conclusion that the figure isn't 14%, 15%, or whatever, nor is it 51%, which was what there was some other research that indicated it was 51%. That Climate Healers say it's 87%. 87% animal agriculture is 87%, bears 87% of the responsibility for the climate crisis. And a big reason for that is because what's referred to as opportunity costs. In other words, if we didn't have animal agriculture, how much carbon could be pulled down from the atmosphere from all the places, all the land that's used for animal agriculture, or certainly a large percentage of it, are being rewilded, being allowed to, trees being planted or being allowed to return to forest, and so that the carbon could be kind of pulled out of the atmosphere. And if you take that into account, this is what they're doing. They're saying you take that into account, along with some other things. They think, they calculate methane as having a bigger impact than what the IPCC say, for instance. That all added up together equates to animal agriculture being 87%, bearing 87% of responsibility for the climate.
I mean, that figure must be contested, I would imagine, though, Ronnie, yeah?
Yes. All these figures are contested to a fro. And I'm not a scientist. I can't say for certain whether that is the case or not, but certainly it's something that needs to be put on the table and something that needs to be looked at. It's out there. It needs to be put out there. There's also been a book written very, very recently by a guy called Ben Mertzer called Food is Climate. That says very much the same thing. And basically what he says is that the climate healers refer to the two major causes of the climate crisis as the burning machine and the killing machine. The burning machine is the burning of carbon, its emissions, caused by the burning of various forms of carbon, and the killing machine, which is animal agriculture. And what Ben Mertzer says is the killing machine is far, far more responsible for the climate crisis than the burning machine. So what we need to do is we need to shut the killing machine down first, and then we can gradually shut down the burning machine. If we just shut down the burning machine, it's not going to be enough. We're still going to have, move towards climate catastrophe. If we just shut down the killing machine, that would be enough, even without shutting down the burning machine. That's what he says. He thinks we should shut down the burning machine, but he says that's not a priority because animal agriculture is so much more responsible than the burning of carbon for the climate crisis.
Ronnie, do they include the Oh, sorry, do they include the oceans in that? Because I know the ocean stores a lot of carbon and the dead zones and everything, the overfishing.
Yeah, the fishing, fishing's included in that, in the harm that fishing causes to the ocean, to the ocean's ability to absorb carbon and everything else. And so, if that is the case, if this is correct, it changes everything, doesn't it? It changes the whole emphasis of the movement to combat the climate crisis. And the problem is there's a resistance. You see, this desire to consume other animals is so embedded in well, not just in ordinary people, but in in the economy, in politics, in big business, and everything. That there's obviously resistance to that. You see, the thing is because you could kind of replace everything with renewable energy, we can do everything the same, like we can have electric cars and everything can be renewable energy. We can kind of carry on living the same, can't we? Still eating the steaks and everything, So that's quite appealing, isn't it? To people, you just have to change that part of it. But if you have to change your diet, many people are very, very resistant to that. But we have to do, we have to do that, switching to a vegan diet is massively important, especially if this is correct, that it is 87%. And so that's something, not that we shouldn't be trying to stop the burning of carbon as well, because that not only does that contribute to the climate crisis, that it causes pollution and has other harmful effects on other animals as well. But this is this is hugely important. Both this book and the paper produced by Climate Healers. People go to Climate Healers website, they can find the position paper on animal agriculture and have a read through that. It kind of is kind of fairly technical, and my eyes kind of glazed over a bit reading. But as I said, I'm not a scientist. But if that's correct, what these people are saying is correct, it changes everything.
Well, in terms of the statistics and differing statistics, I mean, this is just sort of like led. I know we're winding up now. This is just very, very clearly led on to the fourth point for why animal advocates need to be really clued up on catastrophic climate breakdown. And this is basically going to be saved for the next time. But the taste is that the animal death industry has been basically climate washing with statistics to do with its impact on catastrophic climate breakdown. There's been a 5-month investigative investigation by a news organisation called BSmog, called How the Meat Industry is Climate Washing Its Polluting Business Model. And one of the things they talk about is the different ways that the statistics that are used are collated, and the animal death industry uses the ones that makes it look really like there's a tiny amount of, it contributes a tiny amount to catastrophic climate breakdown, whereas independent bodies are sort of like looking at a factor of maybe 20, 30 or 100 times more. And there are different categories, but I can go into that more next time. And the way that this is a concerted strategy, that this has been dreamt up by various animal or the so-called livestock sector and meat industry entities. They've all got together, this multi-billion-pound dollar whatever entity, and they've dreamt up a very specific strategy to address the dangers of what they see is the challenge to their industry of catastrophic climate breakdown. So it's a misinformation campaign that to some extent is somewhat being successful, but that's something that once we're aware of it as advocates, we can start to address it. It's a very detailed report and very interesting, actually, really interesting.
Yeah, so that's for next time. So we're on almost 90 minutes now, so we ought to go and let people.
Brian agrees.
Yeah, Brian.
Oh,
Brian agrees.
Brian's hungry.
That's his dinner.
So thanks for everybody for tuning in, and we shall take up the reins. Can we say that next week? So
I don't think we can say that.
No, I don't think we can. No. Yeah,
you've committed a transgression now.
I know. Yeah. Ah, well, I resign. So, goodbye, everyone.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.